heard from the final Skylab crew who splashed down 84 days, 1 hour and 15 minutes following their mission. Tonight's splashdown at the end of 168 days in space is exactly twice as long as that former record from the final That's Skylab the previous longest U.S. mission in a space capsule. So we've got a lot of history happening once again tonight.
So we have a couple of, we have a bit of time before the next major event, that is claw separation at 10:57 p.m. Pacific time. So we just finished and had a nominal suit leak check, and from now until then the team is coasting until they sort of reach their optimal position in space to begin the sequences to shed some more weight in the form of the trunk, and then start the deorbit burn, which should last just over 16 minutes, and then we'll see the capsule deorbit and eventually go through the Earth's atmosphere, return back to Earth, and splash down at our primary site off the coast of Panama City, Florida.
We've had a lot of action so far today with that undocking command coming on time at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. We've been with you ever since through all of those 4 departure burns that occurred, putting Dragon exactly on the trajectory to splash down in Panama City later, as well as the prop wasting burn, which we saw about an hour ago, a little less than an hour ago, getting rid of around 81 to 91 kilograms of propellant from the vehicle, making it a little bit lighter for re-entry, as well as it doesn't affect the phasing. So that was not one of those burns that really changes our trajectory. We have the astronauts now back in their suits and 4 good suit leak checks, and we just heard another weather briefing. So next major milestones are that slew, which is putting Dragon into the proper position for claw and trunk separation, eventually deorbit burn.
So everything continuing to go pretty smoothly here today. Pretty excited for the crew to return back to Earth after their 6-month journey and duration in space. They must be pretty excited as well. Yeah, we were, I don't want to say lucky, but the trip duration from undocking to splashdown was only 6.5 hours. So that it could take as long as 39 hours. So I'm sure the crew is pretty stoked that they get the sort of the lower extreme of that scale.
And that's dependent on a lot of things. It depends on the splashdown location. It also depends on crew sleep schedules. So we want our crew to be well rested. Obviously, we expect this to be a fully autonomous mission, and not that they would need to make any actions in the vehicle themselves. But we do want them to be able to monitor the vehicle as they continue on their journey back home. And so we sometimes need to work in a sleep shift in there for them, and that can significantly change the length of undocking to splashdown time. But it worked well today that we have about a 6.5 hour undocking to splashdown time, which is probably about the lowest that we will see with these crew missions.
So we have a couple minutes here. Let's take some more questions from social media. We have one from Christian. How is the splashdown location chosen for each flight? Well, typically we have a number of potential locations to choose from. We have 4 on the west coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico, and then we have an additional 3 on the east coast. A lot goes into choosing where exactly Dragon will splash down. Weather is certainly a huge part of that as well, but also the geographic location in which the boats and personnel can be there to support. We have a lot of support staff outside of Houston and near the Cape in Florida, so we try to strategize, splashing the capsule down there. That way, we have all the expertise, the medical attention in case we do need that.
This question, do the astronauts eat and drink while returning in Dragon or not until they splash down? Well, we got a little glimpse of that earlier. If you rewind a few hours, you'll get to see the crew was having a meal in the Crew Dragon capsule, and they're only scheduled to have 1 meal this time because, as we mentioned, it's a 6.5 hour undocking to splashdown timeline. When Crew 2 launched a couple of weeks ago, we saw them have a couple of meals. They had a dinner and a breakfast, but there are also a lot of snacks on board. And if the crew, for some reason, needed to stay in orbit for a couple of days, they each have enough food for 3 days worth of meals.
Yeah, so continue to send us your questions using the hashtag LaunchAmerica, and we'll try our best to answer them here on air as we continue to be live, and we'll continue to be live all the way until crew recovery later on tonight. So this question here, how does Dragon get its power supply? That is a great question. So if you've been following the Dragon program, the original Dragon 1 capsule had these solar arrays, sort of wings that would unfurl after it separated from the second stage of Falcon 9. And on that wing was basically a bunch of solar panels that it would convert the energy from the sun into usable energy for the Dragon. Dragon 2 uses a similar energy, but it's physically a bit different. The solar panels are built into the trunk itself. So if you do see a picture of the Dragon 2 vehicle, you'll notice that its trunk section, the bottom half of it is white. The other half is this black sort of glossy color. Those are the solar panels themselves. So right now, that trunk is still attached onto the capsule, and Dragon is still getting energy and telemetry from that trunk. But here shortly, in about an hour, we're actually going to be removing that trunk. It'll burn up upon re-entry, and will expose the heat shield on the Dragon capsule, and the Dragon capsule itself will just be running on battery power until it returns back to Earth.
Speaking of returning back to Earth, this question from Ahmed: how long does the communication blackout last when the Dragon crew re-enter the Earth's atmosphere? So as we've mentioned, once Crew Dragon begins re-entry, a lot of plasma builds up on the outside of the vehicle, and that causes a communications and telemetry blackout. So we won't be able to see or receive that telemetry from the vehicle, and we expect that to last about 7 minutes. However, Crew Dragon is totally autonomous at this time, and so it should be performing any necessary maneuvers, and we will regain communications with the astronauts once the capsule slows down significantly and that temperature on the outside isn't so great and we lose that plasma.
Yeah, the plasma is really a function of just the amount of friction that the Dragon capsule is going to be experiencing when it meets the atmosphere of the Earth. Right now, it's moving at over 17,000 miles per hour, 20 times greater than the speed of sound. And it's going to basically go through this wall of air particles, and it's going to get really, really hot very, very quickly. And when you superheat that gas, you start to form plasma, which is another state of matter. And that plasma can start to interfere with some of the communications from Dragon and ground. So, as Dragon, initially enters that, you're going to see a lot of plasma build up. And then as we slow down, we'll start to regain communications. And then eventually, it'll slow down enough to about 350 miles an hour where we'll start to deploy our drogue chutes. And then after that, the main chutes to slow the Dragon vehicle all the way down to about 16 miles an hour. So from 17,500 miles per hour, using the beauty of the Earth's atmosphere, a ton of heat, a bunch of parachutes, we go from 17,500 miles an hour to about 16 miles per hour, and then we splash down nice and softly in the Gulf of Mexico.
A much softer splashdown.
Yeah. We have another question here. Why does Crew Dragon land on water? That is a great question. For those that are following the space program, most of the space crafts nowadays have been landing on land. The space shuttle was essentially a plane. It had a runway and it landed itself. The Soyuz lands on land with the help of some parachutes. Dragon, we felt that landing on water gives us a little bit more margin in terms of splashdown. So in that sense, it's a bit simpler, right? The astronauts, in case there were some sort of malfunction with the parachutes, there is just that little bit of margin more landing in that nice sort of soft body of water as opposed to land.
And we are continuing to answer your questions with the hashtag #LaunchAmerica. So if you're on Twitter, submit your question, include that hashtag, and we will do our very best to answer those. This one from Sean: what activities will happen post Splashdown? And there are quite a few. It's going to be very busy for the crews that are already awaiting the spacecraft. So the crews inside the crew members inside Crew Dragon Resilience really won't have many actions. They'll continue monitoring the vehicle and as well as the performance of the teams outside. But we'll be looking for several things. We'll have 2 fast boats that approach the vehicle. They'll begin sniffing, essentially, seeking out these fuels, or these fumes, I should say, from hypergolic fuels. Those can be toxic fumes in the air, and we want to make sure before we bring anyone too close to the vehicle that those are clear. And once that is clear, we can bring in the recovery vessel. The capsule will be rigged by a crew member and prepared to be picked up by the recovery vessel. And once that occurs, it will be lifted into the nest on the recovery vessel, which tonight is Go Navigator. It will be pulled toward the egress platform, which is a platform built right up to the hatch. Eventually, the hatch will open, and the first person to be able to see Shannon, Mike, Soichi, and Victor after their nearly 6 months in space will be some medical doctors. They will get to check in on the crew and make sure they are ready for egress. We'll have those crew members egressed and continue with some medical checks. And shortly thereafter, they will board a helicopter that will be on top of the boat. They will return to Florida from the helicopter and then to Houston from a NASA plane.
Yeah, that recovery vessel is really a multi-function vessel, and here is a great view of inside the Crew Dragon right now. On the left-hand side of the screen is the commander, Mike Hopkins, and to his right is the pilot, Victor Glover. They're looking at the touchscreen displays, providing them with a ton of mission data. But as I was mentioning, the boat itself, right, it has a crane that can lift the Dragon. It has a medical bay to tend to the needs of the astronauts, and also has a helicopter pad to depart from as well.
And we are now less than an hour from that deorbit burn. We still have a couple of milestones that need to occur before that, including the claw separation. That's located on Dragon's trunk and connects the thermal control, power, telemetry, and fluid and avionics system components. Once that separates, we will be able to separate the trunk from Crew Dragon itself. That exposes the heat shield. And then we will have the Crew Dragon conduct that deorbit burn lasting about 16.5 minutes. So all 3 of those major milestones coming up now in less than an hour.
And the hands that you see closest to your screen, that was Shannon Walker. Here's a great view of Mike Hopkins, who is closer to your screen, and then Victor Glover, who is next to him.
It has to be very interesting and hopefully a little bit fun for them to get to monitor this mission and check out all of that telemetry and data and just how the spacecraft is operating. As you can see, though, those visors are lifted. They had the 4 successful suit leak checks, and they are go to lift those visors. The suits are not pressurized right now. They will not be pressurized for splashdown, but those leak checks that we had earlier ensure us that if we needed to repressurize the suits, we do have a good seal there. So while they will lower their visors for that re-entry, they will not be needing to pressurize those suits.
And these touchscreen displays really provide a ton of information for the astronauts. They know they can let them know where Dragon is at in relative position to the Earth, which Draco thrusters are firing at any given time, as well as provide Dragon entry angle, its perigee.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for deorbit entry and landing.
Resilience copies. Go for deorbit entry and landing.
And we just saw the thumbs up across all of the crew members must be excited to get the final go for deorbit burn and then eventually landing.
And it's amazing to realize that they are in space right now. They're still in microgravity, but in under 2 hours, they will have splashed back down to Earth. That fast, a 6-month mission, and it's able to return to Earth and their families and friends in just 6.5 hours today.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about the seats, and these crew members are currently, their seats are a little more reclined. They're at that 40-degree angle, essentially, and they are, if you were looking at them, they are really facing that forward hatch underneath the nose cone. That's what docks to the International Space Station, and that's what they would fly into and out of at the space station. And once we go for landing or through that deorbit burn, I should say, those seats will actuate and turn up to a 26-degree angle. And so they're still a little bit reclined, and they still have the opportunity to monitor those devices at the front, those touchscreen displays, but it will be properly angled for splashdown to distribute the correct amount of weight onto the seats.
So to the very right of your screen, there is sort of an arm bar and the side hatch. Later on, after splashdown, that is the hatch that they'll be opening up and egressing the vehicle from. This is the same hatch that they used to enter the vehicle back in November of 2000, November 15th in 2020. This hatch, after launch, does stay closed while it's docked at the International Space Station, and they use the forward or top hatch to egress the vehicle when docked at the ISS.
You can see a mirror on Mike Hopkins' left wrist, and that is actually one of the features that is shared with an extravehicular mobility unit. That mirror gives him an opportunity to look at what he cannot turn his head around at and see. And on an extravehicular mobility unit, that is used for the astronauts to control the dials on the front of their spacesuits. So that's how they control volume of comms as well as the temperature inside their spacesuit. So they use that wrist mirror, and the instructions on the front of their spacesuit are written backwards so that when they're viewed through the mirror, they are read correctly. So that's a neat little, I haven't noticed that before. It's a neat little thing they share.
And that is tricky. I mean, if anyone's ever tried to do something in the mirror, I'm sure it takes quite a bit of training to make sure that they are coordinated right, especially when they're doing something as important as the spacewalks. So next major event is claw separation. That's coming up at 10:57 p.m. Pacific time, and then shortly after that we'll have trunk separation. And then at 11:03 p.m. Pacific time, we'll begin the deorbit burn, which lasts about 16 minutes. Earlier today, we had the prop wasting burn, where we shed about 80 to 90 kilograms of unneeded fuel. After claw separation, trunk separation, and finishing the deorbit burn, we will have shed a total of 6,000 pounds off of the Dragon. So departing the International Space Station, the Dragon vehicle was about 27,000 pounds. And again, after the deorbit burn is done and before they re-enter the Earth, we're down to 21,000 pounds. And it is important that we try to shed as much weight as possible. The drogue chutes have a tremendous job to stabilize and slow the vehicle down, as well as the main chute. So any unnecessary weight that we can shed will help sort of bolster the functions of both of those parachutes.
One interesting thing I learned about parachutes back in DM2's return last year is how they open slowly. So it's called disreefing. The drogue chutes and the main parachutes, you'll see them, they don't pop out to their full expanded size right away. They open rather slowly and allow that air to come in gradually. And it's really only over a few seconds, but that keeps us from really shocking the parachute system and jolting the vehicle too much, as it's really slowing them down from 350 miles per hour for those drogue chutes, and then from 119 miles per hour for those main chutes.
Yeah, and parachutes are an extremely difficult thing to get right. We've had an extensive amount of testing. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of drops and testing to make sure that we have these parachutes and the design right. The CRS missions using the Dragon 1 vehicle also had very similar parachutes. But this is another function of their design to make sure that, again, they're not at risk of detaching or shocking our crew members inside or the vehicles. And so that slow, gradual opening is critical to make sure that the spacecraft lands softly in the water.
And once the spacecraft does land, the parachutes will be cut away from the spacecraft. That's another autonomous function. But that keeps the vehicle from being pulled potentially by the wind. And as we mentioned, that should happen autonomously, but the crew does have a button inside the spacecraft that would allow them to do so if necessary.
Just a couple weeks ago, the astronauts on the Crew-1 astronauts that you see here were in a very similar position. They had a dock relocation maneuver where they undocked from the forward port of the International Space Station and redocked to the Zenith port. So a very similar type of procedure where they had donned their spacesuits, performed all of the leak checks, got in the spacecraft, suited up, and left the International Space Station temporarily, redocked, and then egressed the vehicle another time. And today they're doing a similar maneuver, but this time they're returning back to Earth.
And we are continuing to monitor the mission and bring you live coverage all the way from undocking through splashdown and recovery. So we are looking for those next major milestones to happen very shortly, including the claw separation, trunk separation, and eventually the deorbit burn, which commits us to splashing down off the coast of Panama City, Florida. Weather continues to look good. The WB-57 with those thermal imaging cameras has arrived on the station and is positioning itself, preparing for the re-entry of Crew Dragon, as well as all the personnel on Go Navigator, the main recovery ship tonight, are in place, standing by. Everything continues to really move smoothly on the space side of this process, as well as everything here on Earth. So we're looking forward to welcoming back our 4 Crew-1 astronauts.
Dragon, SpaceX for some additional words on TDRS communication.
Go ahead, Solo.
Hopper, we're showing a slightly elevated probability that we're going to lose the return link at the end of the window we discussed earlier, and that's from 0551 to 0556. If that happens, we will be doing a standard comm check once on the other side. Please plan to give us a verbal report on general sensations regarding trunk sep. That'll help us assess dynamics of trunk separation.
Okay, you are anticipating return link issues 0551 to 0556, and make sure that we report on trunk sep, give you guys a verbal report on that.
Yeah, that's a good readback, and especially the sensations y'all feel, the pyros and such are latching values that we'll be able to assess afterwards.
Okay, copy that. We'll let you know what our sensations are.
SpaceX copies, thanks.
If you're just joining us, Dragon has performed its final departure burns from the International Space Station with Crew-1 NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Soichi Noguchi all on board and heading home. Right now we have a view inside the cabin of the Crew-1 capsule. Today's mission actually began back on Sunday, November 15th, when Falcon 9 launched Dragon from historic launch pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Following the successful liftoff, Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi arrived at the space station about 27 hours later and have been there ever since. While on board the station for the last 6 months, Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi have supported hundreds of experiments and took part in day-to-day operations during the Expedition 64 and 65 crew. Hopkins and Glover and Noguchi completed several spacewalks to upgrade station and prepare for new solar arrays set to arrive later on this summer. Dragon's return to Earth will mark the completion of NASA and SpaceX's first official long-duration mission for our commercial crew program.
Earlier today, we saw the crew members board the Crew Dragon Resilience capsule for one final time while in space. They said farewell to the other 7 people who are still aboard the International Space Station. There have been 11 people living on the International Space Station for the last week since the arrival of Crew 2, but as I mentioned, that number back down to 7 with the departure of Crew 1. With Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi on board, the spacecraft autonomously undocked from the International Space Station at 5:35 p.m. Pacific time this evening, and then began a series of departure burns to move away from the station. We are bringing you live coverage of the rest of the mission, including the moment we jettison Dragon's trunk to its deorbit burn, all the way to splashdown, which is set for 11:57 p.m. Pacific time, 6:57 GMT off the coast of Panama City, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, due to a tracked and planned communications blackout, we won't be able to show you every step of Dragon's journey home, but we will bring you live status updates as they come in. And let's walk through all of the dynamic activities ahead of us this evening. We will be looking for claw separation coming up at 10:57, so less than 10 minutes from now. And that is the detachment of the claw, which provides telemetry, power, and data from the trunk.
Dragon SpaceX, we show deorbit sequence start in just over 5 minutes.
And resilience copies, we see this.
And Dragon SpaceX, be advised, we're showing some ready return link down here. We will continue as pre-briefed.
And that communications, we do expect that communications to be ready as noted by the core, meaning that it might not be clear or come through at all times due to a tracking data and relay satellite system issue that we are tracking. However, everything still remains go for deorbit burn coming up shortly. But first, a couple of other items. The claw separation, as I mentioned, the claw is located on Dragon's trunk and connects the thermal power control, telemetry, and more from the trunk to the capsule. And after that separation, just less than a minute later, we will see trunk separation. The trunk will burn up upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, and we are only returning the capsule portion with our crew members to splash down. At 11:03 p.m. Pacific or 6:03 GMT, we will see the deorbit burn start. And deorbit burn today is scheduled to last about 16 minutes. Dragon will fire its 4 bulkhead thrusters into the direction it is currently traveling. So this serves as essentially a braking maneuver and will help Dragon drop out of Earth's orbit. Deorbit burn should be complete at 11:19 p.m. Pacific or 6:19 GMT.
And once we fire those forward bulkhead thrusters for the last time, we'll then close the nose cone. That should happen at 11:22 p.m. Pacific time. About 20 minutes later at 11:43 p.m. Pacific time, there will be a planned communications blackout period as Dragon re-enters the Earth's atmosphere due to the heat and the amount of plasma buildup. It'll interfere with the communications, but at that point, Dragon really is steering itself to the targeted landing site. And then at 11:45, we'll begin that entry again, starting to build up that plasma around the base of the Dragon capsule.
At 11:52 Pacific, 6:52 GMT, we expect to see the drogue parachutes deploy. Those are 2 parachutes that will begin to slow the vehicle down from 350 miles per hour. And at 11:53, just less than a minute after those drogue sheets deploy, they will then pull out the main parachutes. We expect to see 4 parachutes, those orange and white, above the capsule that will slow the capsule down to approximately 15 to 16 miles per hour for an on-time splashdown at 11:57 p.m. Pacific time, 6:57 GMT, off the coast of Panama City, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico.
Now, in preparation of Splashdown, the Dragon recovery team has been busy over the last week. One of the big ticket items has been final selection of the landing site. And to increase the options for the space station departure, the teams identified a total of 7 possible splashdown locations. In order to meet NASA's timeline requirements for crew recovery, these potential splashdown locations have to be close to a port and medical facilities. Since Dragon is capable of splashdown on either side of the Florida Panhandle, we have 2 identical and fully equipped recovery vessels ready to support, one in the Gulf of Mexico and the other in the Atlantic Ocean. With all that in mind, it's easy to see how determining the landing site is a complex process. Today, as Leah mentioned, we'll be splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico just off the coast of Panama City, Florida.
And it's hard to believe we are in the final orbit right now of Crew Dragon in orbit of Earth, and the deorbit burn is scheduled to start in 10 minutes. So before that, we are obviously looking for claw separation and trunk separation, with that being part of the deorbit sequence, now starting in under 2 minutes. So for these recovery operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone, ensuring public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew aboard the spacecraft. Multiple notices have been issued to the mariners in advance and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are currently deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases risks to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. So for the safety of the crew and your personal safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we will be bringing you the very best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
So the teams have been looking at return opportunities since April 28th, with weather being the major factor. We waived off our initial opportunities to undock on the 28th and on the 30th, with teams making the decision to pursue our current undocking and splashdown plan just yesterday. The weather conditions for the Gulf for tonight's attempt are ideal for splashdown and recovery, with very low wind speeds and almost...
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
President's copies, we see the same.
So we just got the call that the deorbit sequence has begun, which is great. So we're expecting to hear a call out that the call separation will happen in just a few minutes here. But this will be the first time that we'll be bringing the crew back in a nighttime splashdown, but we are well prepared.
SpaceX was able to practice for this very scenario with the return of the CRS-21 cargo mission, returning a similar Dragon capsule with a nighttime splashdown off the Florida coast. As well as all of our recovery teams, they've practiced for recovery conditions at night, giving us confidence to carry out this operation and bring the crew home safely. SpaceX also has additional personnel on the recovery ship to recover Dragon's parachutes and our standard set of medical professionals and Dragon technicians to secure the capsule and get the crew out quickly and safely. And our fun history fact for this return, this will be the first night splashdown of a U.S. crewed spacecraft since Apollo 8's pre-dawn return in the Pacific Ocean on December 27, 1968, with NASA astronauts Frank Borman, Jem Lovell, and Bill Anders.
So in the next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi home. First, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and then start to separate its claw, then jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the spacecraft. The trunk is currently connected to the aft or bottom section of the Dragon capsule, where the heat shield is located. So in order to expose the heat shield and get the vehicle ready for for atmospheric re-entry, will jettison the trunk.
From there, the spacecraft will use its forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to Earth. The burn will last more than 16 minutes once it starts.
And to prepare for these upcoming events, right now the Dragon capsule is doing a number of things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon for Mike, Victor, Shanna, and Soichi nice and cool during re-entry. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk.
And I'm receiving information that claw separation is currently occurring right on time, and that was scheduled for 10:57 Pacific. So right on time for that claw separation. Coming up next will be trunk separation very shortly after. And I'm sure we will hear a call out to the crew shortly about our claw separation.
Yeah, over the next hour, there's going to be a lot of events happening in order to get the Dragon spacecraft.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nominal trunk jettison.
And SpaceX from Resilience, we see the same, and you could definitely feel the claw sep as well as hear it, and the same for trunk jettison was very obvious. And through the centerline cameras, you could definitely see a lot of the debris from the separation.
Okay, thanks, Resilience, for that thorough report. We copy all.
Cool. So there were some report outs from the crew about what they felt when the claw had separated, as well as the trunk as it was jettisoned. And we did get confirmation that both occurred nominally, meaning that telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed, ready for atmospheric re-entry. Up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to re-entry, the slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude, and the deorbit burn itself. This is, again, the last time that the four Dracos, which are the four thrusters located at the top of the vehicle, the last time that they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown zone off the coast of Panama City, Florida, and will last a bit more than 16 minutes.
Looks like we're onto nominal comms for the rest of the mission at this point.
That's good news. Thanks for that update, Sol.
And good news indeed. As we were mentioning, we were tracking some issues with one of the TDRS tracking data and relay satellite system satellites that was preventing us from getting some communication from the vehicle at certain points in their orbit. However, that seems to have cleared up. And next, we are looking for deorbit burn to begin in just about 3 minutes. As we mentioned, that should last almost 16 and a half minutes. And that is the braking maneuver that's going to drop Dragon out of Earth orbit and bring them back into the atmosphere. So things are really speeding up with that nominal claw separation and trunk jettison. And they reported some similar things that we heard from Bob Bankin and Doug Hurley, mentioning that it was something you could definitely feel jettisoning that trunk. So very interesting and good news that everything still continues to look well. And things look pretty good on Earth here too. This is a view from the Go Navigator recovery ship, and off to the left, that is indeed a dolphin who is checking out the operations as Go Navigator begins to move into place to recover Crew Dragon once they splash down tonight. So beautiful things in space and on Earth.
Yeah, it seems like we're not the only ones interested in the astronauts' return. Maybe aside from medical staff, they might get a greeting from some marine animals as well. That is very, very cool picture of those dolphins. Again, just a few minutes away from the beginning of that 16-minute deorbit burn. We just had trunk separation, and a couple of things about the trunk separation. Earlier in the night, we formed a prop wasting burn to get rid of unneeded propellants. We shed about 80 to 90 kilograms worth of propellant, and to lighten the load that Dragon will be experiencing when it comes back to Earth.
And this is an incredible shot right now we have of the separation. That is Crew Dragon and its trunk now separate, flying free. And we are just moments away from hearing the beginning of the deorbit burn.
And as I was talking, the trunk itself, and as well as the propellant used in this deorbit burn, once all is said and done, we'll be shedding about 6,000 pounds of mass from the Dragon spacecraft. So starting off at around 27,000 pounds, all going down to about 21,000 pounds. So those help to, again, lessen the load that the parachutes will have to sort of carry when they deploy and eventually slow down the spacecraft.
This is just absolutely an incredible view, and this is coming to us from the International Space Station, so they do still have a little bit of an eye on Dragon. Once Crew Dragon begins that re-entry period following the deorbit burn completion, we hope to have infrared imagery thanks to the WV-57 aircraft that has departed from Ellington and is in the proper location, and they have thermal imagery systems aboard, and fingers crossed we get some visuals of Crew Dragon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And right on time, we also have the start of the deorbit burn. As we mentioned, this should last 16 minutes, 26 seconds. So this has fully committed Crew Dragon to coming home. So just within the last 10 minutes, Crew Dragon jettisoned its trunk and initiated this deorbit burn just a minute ago.
And like we mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire. Dragon's resilience has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on a final trajectory to the landing site in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Panama City, Florida. There is a beautiful shot of the crew inside. That is Commander Mike Hopkins, closest to your screen, and next to him is Victor Glover, the pilot.
And on the screens, those are the thrusters firing. As we mentioned, we are in the midst of the deorbit burn right now, and they are monitoring. So this is an amazing opportunity to get to see the inside of the cabin at this point. We just had that view from the International Space Station of Crew Dragon and the trunk having recently separated. And this is these are the 4 crew members who are currently inside, and they're committed to coming home.
They're using the screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco thrusters firing, and trajectory details like entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. Dragon is flying itself, so all the crew has to do is stay strapped in their seats and enjoy the flight. And they're just keeping tabs on things using those touchscreen display monitors.
So it's been about 2 minutes since the burn began. We are in the entry, descent, and landing phase of the mission. This is the largest burn of the evening, and as we mentioned, this really commits us to splashing down specifically at that Panama City location just off the coast.
And we were monitoring weather all the way until the point of deorbit burn because, in the event that the weather shifted or we needed to potentially target a different site, this deorbit burn wouldn't have begun. But now, like Leah mentioned, we are committed and we'll be looking forward to the splashdown of not only the capsule, but the crew members as well.
And that deorbit burn should end at 11:19 p.m. Pacific time. Following that, we will close the nose cone a few minutes later. The nose cone is open right now because, as you can see in those screens, those 4 thrusters firing are the 4 bulkhead thrusters, and they are located underneath the nose cone. So we leave the nose cone open right now for the 16.5-minute burn, and we will close it once that is complete. 3.5 minutes into the burn, continuing to monitor the data and continuing to get these great views from inside the cabin. We won't keep these views for the entire return home. As we mentioned, once Crew Dragon really begins its entry into the Earth's atmosphere, we anticipate a loss of signal for about 7 minutes, where we won't be able to receive telemetry or data or video or audio from the Crew Dragon vehicle. However, Crew Dragon is entirely autonomous, flying itself, knows exactly what it needs and where it needs to go. And so hopefully at that point, the astronauts are just monitoring as well. And the reason for that comms blackout is because plasma builds up on the outside of the capsule due to the speed at which the vehicle is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and building up that heat to around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit outside the capsule. So a very, very cool view right now. On the left, you've got from the International Space Station, Crew Dragon and its trunk, and on the right-hand side, the 4 astronauts who are inside that small white dot preparing to return to Earth.
Yeah, the distance from the trunk and distance between the trunk and the Crew Dragon vehicle is continuing to get larger and larger, and the deep orbit burn does effectively what his name says. We're taking the vehicle out of orbit and lowering its altitude until eventually, we make its way back to Earth.
We're now 5 minutes into the deorbit burn, about 11 minutes left. Crew still monitoring, and teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne still monitoring as well.
This crew has been in space for about 6 months. Their journey started on November 15th of last year, and now really they're on their last section before they can return back to Earth and get that fresh air that we all love.
Now that the deorbit burn has started, we really are less than an hour away from splashing down. We are expecting splashdown to occur at 11:57 p.m. Pacific time, 6:57 GMT, so really less than 50 minutes away. As we mentioned here on the Earth side of things, everyone is in place on the Go Navigator vessel that needs to be there when the crew arrives. 2 fast boats will approach the vehicle and ensure there are no toxic vapors from those hypergolic fumes that may be present after splashing down. They will also begin rigging the vehicle and prepare it to be hoisted into the nest on Go Navigator. But ahead of all of that, we also have the WB-57 aircraft from Ellington Field in Houston, Texas, that is in position, and we will be awaiting views from the aircraft once Crew Dragon begins its re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. There's a thermal imaging camera on the aircraft that we hope to get some views from.
And at the bottom of those touchscreen displays, you'll notice some buttons, really important functions like chute deploy or cutting the main chutes. These have dedicated buttons for them. Otherwise, the team can, use a number of views to monitor the mission as they're doing right now. Hypergolic fuels or hypergolic propellants are pretty common for space propellants. They are one of their properties is they don't require an ignition source. So once two components are combined, typically a fuel and oxidizer, they will ignite just by being in contact with one another. And it is great for, use in space, but one of the downsides is they can be pretty toxic to humans. So that's why it's super important that when the spacecraft does land, the first fast boat, one of the first things they do is perform a sniff test to make sure that none of that toxic vapor is still in the vicinity. So that way the other personnel can approach and continue with the rest of the recovery operations.
We're coming up on 9.5 minutes into this 16.5-minute maneuver, so approximately 7 minutes left, and everything is looking good. Crew's still monitoring those thrusters in the screens on their displays. And this is the final burn of the day. Crew Dragon, as we said, is now committed to splashing down off the coast of Panama City, Florida tonight. And a reminder of the astronauts that are coming home today. Their closest to the screen is Mike Hopkins. He's the commander, and to his right is Victor Glover, the pilot. To Victor Glover's right is Shannon Walker. And to Mike Hopkins' left, we have Soichi Noguchi, an astronaut with the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency.
So closest to your screen is Crew Dragon Commander Mike Hopkins. A little bit about him. He was born in Lebanon, Missouri, but grew up outside of Richland, Missouri. He was selected as an astronaut by NASA in 2009. Hopkins is a colonel in the United States Air Force and holds degrees in aerospace engineering. He also flew on the Russian Soyuz as a member of the Expedition 37 and 38 crew, logging at the time 166 days in space. He performed 2 spacewalks, totaling almost 13 hours to change out a degraded pump module on the space station. He also has military experience, including testing the C-17 and C-130 aircraft.
And those 2 spacewalks were from his previous mission. He added to those while he was on the International Space Station during this flight, added a couple more actually. And the deorbit burn, we are just about 4.5 minutes away from that being complete. Things are still looking good. And as a reminder, this is a braking maneuver. So Crew Dragon is firing those thrusters into the same direction that it was traveling. This should slow Crew Dragon down enough to drop it out of orbit.
So we are waiting on the deorbit burn to end, and that should happen at approximately 11:19 p.m. Pacific time, just a few minutes from now. The astronauts on board are continuing to monitor the burns of the 4 forward bulkhead thrusters.
Things have really picked up in the last 15 minutes or so. The crew, we had claw separation from the trunk and the capsule itself. The claw connecting those thermal control, or the thermal and avionics and data and telemetry information between the crew capsule and the trunk. And we had trunk jettison and some amazing shots there for a moment from the International Space Station of both the trunk and Crew Dragon flying separately of one another. And now we are in this deorbit burn, now 14 minutes in, meaning we only have about 2.5 minutes left. And this deorbit burn committing them to coming home to Panama City or off the coast of Panama City, Florida. And we are looking at splashdown at about 11:57 p.m. Pacific time. So 40 minutes from now, we will have these Crew-1 astronauts back on planet Earth.
And since that claw separation and jettison of the trunk, the Dragon spacecraft is running on internal battery power. So everything that you see on screen is powered by batteries on the capsule itself, and it's no longer drawing power from the trunk.
And as you can see, the astronauts still have their visors up on their suits. That is fine for right now, and they will need to lower those visors once it comes time for the re-entry of the capsule into the atmosphere. So this deorbit burn is not the re-entry itself. We don't have those extreme temperatures building up on the outside of the vehicle right now. That's why we still have telemetry and communications with the spacecraft. But once we begin that re-entry, they will close their visors. We're still tracking this deorbit burn, getting reports that the flight path angle is valid. Everything looking nominal for this burn. And we should have about 1 minute left.
And this deorbit burn is a braking maneuver. After this, we're sort of done with any major burns. The majority of speed reduction will be done by the atmosphere of the Earth, and then after that, the parachutes that will deploy on the Dragon spacecraft. So again, just a few seconds away from completing this, long duration 16-minute burn, and then we'll be entering the Earth's atmosphere very shortly after that.
And we are seconds away from that call out. As you saw, we lost video with the crew. That was one of those tracked loss of signals.
Dragon SpaceX, we show deorbit burn is complete with nominal performance. Nose cone closure initiated.
And SpaceX from Resilience, we copy all. That's great news. And we're following the nose cone closure.
And that is great news. The deorbit burn completed successfully, and now we're moving on to nose cone closure. In the background right now, Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone shut for re-entry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. This will help keep Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi cool and comfortable during the re-entry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes. And at this point, the nose cone is closing and protecting the forward hatch for re-entry. Again, our astronauts are using their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
So we are standing by for confirmation of nose cone closure. We needed to wait until this point because we were using those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters underneath the nose cone to complete that deorbit burn. We did hear nominal deorbit burn, so things continue to move very smoothly for Crew Dragon Resilience on its way home from the International Space Station. So anticipated nose cone closure should come in about 1 minute.
So this view here is mission control in Hawthorne in California. Have a whole team of folks supporting the astronauts' return. We are expecting a planned communication blackout period at 11:43 p.m. Pacific time Again, that is when we have a ton of plasma buildup at the bottom of the capsule. It's going to start to interfere with some of the communications, but that is planned and should last for about 7.5 minutes. At that time, the Dragon spacecraft will continue to steer and pilot itself towards the targeted landing site off the coast of Panama City until we get those communications back and once again can talk to the astronauts.
And we just heard a call that nose cone closure is about 50% complete. So that continues, and we are tracking for that to be complete momentarily. That nose cone protects the forward hatch that the astronauts use to ingress or enter and egress or exit the International Space Station. And so it's important that we are able to protect that area for potential future reuse of this capsule. So we are standing by for confirmation that the nose cone has fully closed. The next major milestone we'll be looking for is the entry of the vehicle and that anticipated loss of signal with the spacecraft. Entry of the vehicle should begin around 11:45, so about 23 minutes from now. And we will be tracking the vehicle its entire way back, even though we don't necessarily have telemetry with it.
And as those vehicles, the vehicle starts to make its way back to Earth, the astronauts on board should experience a max, a peak of 3 to 5 Gs, similar to what they would experience on ascent with the Falcon 9. And then the drogue chutes will deploy, and the main chutes will also deploy after that. And then we can start to begin recovery operations in this nighttime splashdown.
We are standing by for information about the nose cone closure. And the nose cone is closed. The forward hatch now being protected, and those 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters underneath.
So as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to flush nitrox into the cabin and continuing to top off Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi's suit with cold air. Again, this is what will allow the cabin temperature to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach over 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield is pointing forward, the bottom, so to speak, of the capsule, leading the capsule into the landing site. And the suits themselves can detect if they start to get too warm and will automatically start drawing in that nitrox, again, to keep the astronauts nice and cool all the way down until splashdown.
So we have some time until that next major milestone, as we discussed. With the nose cone closed, we'll be looking for that loss of signal. That could come as early as 11:43 with our re-entry into Earth's atmosphere at about 11:45, so 20 minutes from now. Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi, as we've noticed, they are monitoring the actions throughout this this procedure, and they should be able to continue to do so throughout the splashdown of Crew Dragon. They shouldn't have to take any action. Dragon is a fully autonomous vehicle, and so it can fly itself. The crew can step in if necessary and command some movements of the vehicle and some other actions, but things have moved very smoothly throughout the day so far. So we are looking at an on-time splashdown at 11:57 p.m. GM or 11:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Panama City, Florida. And hopefully along the way, the astronauts will simply be able to monitor.
And we did get a weather report just a few minutes ago, and weather continues to look great, excellent, if I may say. Wind speeds are very low, and the height of the waves are also very low. There's no rain in the area, so really ideal conditions for splashdown and recovery of the crew. Once they splash down, there are a couple of boats that will step in to make sure that the area is safe. They'll collect the chutes, and then there is a larger recovery vessel, the same vessel that sort of took the picture of the dolphin earlier, that will come up and scoop Dragon out of the water, hoist it using a crane on the back of the boat onto the deck, and then we have a couple of checkout procedures to get through before we open up the hatch, and medical staff can start to attend and evaluate how the astronauts are doing before they, eventually get into the helicopter and start to make their way back towards land.
And as we've mentioned, we were initially looking at returning these astronauts on the Wednesday, the 28th, having them undock from the International Space Station. And then we looked at Friday, April 30th, so just yesterday, and we were really waiting on perfect weather conditions, which is what we're seeing tonight. And so just a little bit more about exactly what that means and what those parameters are like for us when we're considering splashdown locations. We want the wind to be no greater than 10.5 knots, which is about 17.7 feet per second. And the latest report that we have, the wind is around 2 knots, so very much within that range. We'll need no lightning within or no less than 10 miles away or no more.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nose cone secure for entry.
And SpaceX from Resilience, we see the same.
And good news being relayed to the Crew Dragon crew, that nose cone is closed. But a little bit more about that recovery criteria. We were talking about lightning. We don't want that within the 10-mile radius and away or within the vehicle area, as well as no more than 25% chance of rain. We don't want any clouds lower than 500 feet, which means that's the cloud ceiling. We don't want that any lower than 500 feet. And we need at least a mile of visibility for a night splashdown. So everything is really lining up perfectly for splashdown tonight, and we are continuing to watch Crew Dragon execute all of the pre-programmed maneuvers. The next major one now with the nose cone secured and all of those hooks secured, we'll be looking for really re-entry.
And once the Dragon spacecraft splashes down, we typically try to target about an hour before we can, get in there, recover the vessel, and open up that hatch. But it'll depend. It'll depend on, if there's any hypergolic vapors in the air, how fast the boats can get to the capsule. But, certainly expediency is of the utmost urgency for us. So, the recovery team will certainly try their best to make sure the astronauts are in good, safe hands and on the boat, and eventually the helicopter as soon as we can do so safely.
Yeah, and we hope to see the crew egress or exit Dragon within an hour after splashing down, which is really an impressive timeline. And so as soon as splashdown occurs, those 2 fast boats will begin proceeding toward the vehicle. They'll be sniffing for those hypergolic fuels. We don't want any of those toxic fumes within the vicinity of the capsule. And we will have one person go onto the capsule and begin to rig it or prepare it to be lifted out of the water. And once the recovery ship backs up to the vehicle, they can connect that to the ship and lift it onto the ship. So, and that all can happen within about a 30-minute time frame. Things are really moving quickly now with the start of entry, descent, and landing, a lot of milestones happening. So we hope that you'll stay tuned with us for all of those.
So the Dragon spacecraft itself is, now that it's completed its deorbit burn, its altitude is starting to decrease and decrease and decrease, where eventually it'll start to meet the Earth's atmosphere. And once it does, it's moving, it was moving at over 17,500 miles an hour. And so we'll start to eventually slow it down all the way to 16 miles an hour. And that's generally the rate at which, the speed at which it will splash down in the ocean. So much softer than if it were to hit the water at 17,500 miles an hour.
Now, if you look closely in this picture, that is still Crew Dragon, that view from the International Space Station. As we mentioned, Crew Dragon has just completed its deorbit burn, but that doesn't mean that it's out of space yet. So Crew Dragon is still in a microgravity environment and continues to slow and drop into Earth's atmosphere. That's when our reentry period will really begin, when we expect to also have that loss of communications Andy was just discussing. But right now, still very exciting to be able to have this view from the International Space Station of Crew Dragon, which just departed, that command being sent 6 hours ago for those hooks to open on the nose cone. And those 2 short bursts to separate it from the International Space Station. So a lot can happen in 6 hours, as we've seen, and a lot can also happen in 30 minutes, because in that amount of time, Crew Dragon will be back on Earth.
And those sort of quick movements, that is not Crew Dragon. There it is. That is not Crew Dragon moving in space. That is the camera repositioning itself. So Crew Dragon right now is really on a controlled sort of slow descent back towards Earth. But it is quite cool that the International Space Station can still and has been tracking Crew Dragon all the way since it separated earlier on today.
And taking a look at what the crew aboard the International Space Station is doing. Some of them are actually in their sleep period, so they may be asleep right now, and they also may be, who knows, up in the middle of the night. And
I'm sure some of them are very eager to make sure that they're,
Dragon SpaceX for entry brief.
And go for entry brief.
Everything continues to look awesome. So no updates to timing, no updates for systems. Weather is winds at 3 knots. Wave height remains less than 1 foot. Wave period still at 5 seconds. Recovery team reports in position, ready to support.
Okay, no changes to timeline. Everything is looking good. 3 knots on the wind, less than a foot in 5 seconds on the period. We're currently showing 220, and we're working through our entry brief, and we'll give you a go here momentarily.
Okay, SpaceX copies. Thank you.
You know, as the folks on the crew capsule itself, when your core calls you and says, everything continues to look awesome, that is probably the greatest of great news, as the capsule is gearing up for re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and eventual splashdown here within the hour. As I was mentioning earlier, the crew on the International Space Station, they might be up right now. I'm sure they're very eager to see that, to make sure that their fellow crew members are safely back home on Earth. So, they might be tuning in to make sure that, everything goes smoothly before they, head off to bed.
And meanwhile, on Earth, this is the view that we had earlier from Go Navigator, the recovery vessel that we'll see lift Crew Dragon out of the water later on. They had another visitor. Outer space is a pretty amazing place to explore, and I think the ocean is as well. And so this is one of the local residents in the area of Go Navigator at the time. Go Navigator has now moved closer to the location of Splashdown, and they will then move in once the vehicle has made contact with the water to then retrieve it.
Maybe that's a foreshadowing of the future zero-G indicator. We haven't had a marine animal find space yet, so maybe the next one will be a dolphin.
That's not a bad idea.
This view right now is, again, from the International Space Station. That white dot in the center of your screen is the Dragon capsule, and the crew is inside there, and we're continuing to adjust the cameras, but it continues to make its way back towards Earth.
And those cameras can be adjusted by teams on the ground in Mission Control Houston. So as you mentioned, the astronauts still on the International Space Station have the opportunity to be getting some sleep now. They very well might be watching the coverage, and we thank them as well for tuning in. But yes, just an amazing view for us to get to see this image of Crew Dragon still in space, counting down to that beginning of re-entry. It all happens very fast once that begins. And we are looking for re-entry to begin at 11:45, so less than 10 minutes from now.
And SpaceX from Resilience, tablets are secured on the satchels, restraints are tightened, and visors are down.
SpaceX copies on tablets, restraints, and visors. Thank you.
the crew reporting to the core here that they are in the proper configuration for their deorbit, their reentry essentially. So their visors on their suits are now down and locked in place. We saw them earlier during that deorbit burn. The visors were still up and they needed to be closed prior to the reentry. And so it sounds like everything is properly secured and stowed for that reentry into Earth's atmosphere. As we mentioned, we can expect the astronauts to feel about anywhere between 3 and 5 Gs upon their reentry.
All right, we are under 20 minutes away from splashdown. Here's the rundown again of what to expect here in the next 20 minutes. At 11:43 p.m. Pacific time, we're going to enter that communications blackout period that will last for approximately 7.5 minutes. At 11:45 p.m., entry will begin. That is where the capsule will enter the Earth's atmosphere. 11:52 p.m., the drogue chutes will deploy. Then less than a minute after that, the main chutes will deploy, slowing the Dragon spacecraft down to 16 miles an hour. And then at 11:57 p.m. Pacific time, we have splashdown of the Crew-1 Resilience capsule.
Dragon SpaceX, we show 5 minutes until predicted comm blackout. We will see you on the other side at 0650.
And SpaceX Resilience copies. We'll talk to you on the other side.
And there was that blackout period that I had mentioned earlier. That is the core. Just confirming again the time and the expectation that there will be a blackout period at approximately 11:43 p.m. Pacific time for 7.5 minutes. Again, the Dragon vehicle is autonomous and really steering itself at this point. So even though communications can't be sent back and forth between Dragon and ground, the vehicle is really doing its own thing and making sure that it reaches the targeted landing site as intended.
We are 4 minutes away from that predicted loss of signal. And this is something that occurs whenever we bring home crewed spacecraft, whether it be a Crew Dragon or a Soyuz spacecraft. Their re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere looks very similar. They both have a deorbit burn, and they both slow down significantly upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. And that plasma buildup outside of the vehicle, along with that heat, that prevents us from having communications with the vehicle for several minutes. This time we're looking at about 7 minutes. So it's something that we're very aware of and experienced with. And something else we are just learning is Crew Dragon is about 140 kilometers in altitude. So we continue to track its journey back to Earth. We are now what it looks like 3 minutes away from that anticipated LOS.
So yeah, Leah and I will continue to be with you live, not just until splashdown, but afterwards as part of the recovery operations as well. We'll want to make sure that the team is picked up out of the water and safe and sound on the Go Navigator boat before we sign off. So we still got a bit of time here, but we do have quite a bit of events coming up in the next hour and a half until the crew is safely back on Earth.
And speaking of recovery, that leads into a Launch America question that we have. Do any medical checkups happen after the return of Crew-1 back on Earth? Yes, that's actually the first thing that happens once Crew-1 returns and is hoisted onto the ship. The first person inside the hatch will be a medical doctor that speaks with the crew and allows them to let them know how they're feeling ahead of egress or being taken out of the vehicle. And as soon as that happens, they'll be moved in for some further medical checks ahead of being flown back on a helicopter to shore in Florida. So that'll be the first thing that happens. Safety of our crew and their health is our priority.
Yeah, and part of landing selection slides, one of the criteria is we have to be close to medical facilities. So everything is really planned around the safety of the astronauts and make sure that they come back nice and healthy because they've had such rigorous sort of time up in space, being in microgravity and now returning back to Earth and having to deal with the gravity down here. And so, like Leah mentioned, medical staff will be one of the first people that speak to the astronauts as soon as they land here on Earth.
We just heard that Dragon is in entry attitude, exactly where they need to be. And for this targeted splashdown off the coast of Panama City, Florida, we have that loss of signal that we predict to occur coming up in about 1 minute. And we expect to see that last for about 7 minutes. Hearing our altitude is approximately 108 kilometers above Earth. And as a reminder, our 4 crew members, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Suichi Noguchi, all on board Crew Dragon, returning home today. They are monitoring this process, and so they are well aware that we may lose communications with them as soon as within 30 seconds, and we will speak with them once we are out of that comms blackout period, again, lasting about 7 minutes today. We're standing by for that LOS under 100 kilometers in altitude.
And shortly after we begin that communications blackout period, at 11:45 p.m. Pacific time, that is when the spacecraft will enter the Earth's atmosphere and begin, sort of its final descent back to a splashdown.
Altitude of Crew Dragon now at 90 kilometers. And this view on the right-hand side of your screen and Mission Control Hawthorne here in California, teams monitoring the vehicle. And during this loss of signal point, this communications blackout, they won't be able to get telemetry on the vehicle, but Crew Dragon is totally autonomous.
So at this point, we are entering that communications blackout period. This will last approximately 7.5 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft. During this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. And just as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself and continues to autonomously use Draco thrusters to orient itself during re-entry. During reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from orbital velocity, which is approximately 17,500 miles per hour, and the top temperature around Dragon that Dragon will experience upon reentry is about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
And of course, inside the capsule, it will not get near that hot. We expect the temperature to raise to about 85 degrees. And the astronauts have cool air inside the vehicle as well as inside their suits. And so we have just entered the time of entry interface. So Dragon is now experiencing the Earth's atmosphere for the first time in almost 6 months. So we are continuing to be in this LOS period. As we mentioned, it should last about 7 minutes, and that began at 11:43 p.m. Pacific time. So we have about 4 minutes left of that LOS period, and the crew knows that we will be in communication with them on the other side.
And this has got to be the period where if you followed Bob and Doug's re-entry, they had described Dragon as sort of coming back to life when it re-enters the atmosphere. So again, those temperatures are caused by friction. So the spacecraft itself is moving at such a high rate of speed that it's hitting all these air particles, and so it's got to be the vibration levels and the sound has got to be sort of elevated at this point as it continues to go through the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, this is the first time that the vehicles felt this lift and this drag since launch. The atmosphere in space that doesn't exist, and so it's a vacuum, and haven't been feeling this and been able to hear those sounds that you were discussing. So it's quite a different moment after having 6 months in microgravity. They will begin to start feeling some Gs, as we mentioned, between 3 and 5 Gs upon their reentry. And we are standing by. It's been about 4 minutes now since that loss of signal began. That's an estimated 7 minutes. The plasma is building up on the outside of the capsule as it continues entering the Earth's atmosphere. The temperatures around the capsule building up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And this view from our WB-57 aircraft with its thermal imaging cameras, we will be looking for the Crew Dragon to come into view, and there you can see it in the entry of Earth's atmosphere. Crew Dragon continuing its journey home.
So there's a material on the bottom of the capsule. PICA 3.0 stands for phenolic impregnated carbon ablator. That is the material that is really shielding the capsule from all of that extreme temperature. And so the capsule itself goes in sort of bottom first, and that lightweight material, and that is just a fantastic shot. That is the Dragon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere as it leaves that trail behind. And then again, that illumination is from all of that heat that is building up due to friction of just the re-entry speeds of Dragon when it meets the Earth's atmosphere.
And that view coming from the boat, Go Navigator. Crew Dragon continuing, as you said, to enter Earth's atmosphere. So having these two views right now, with it being a nighttime splashdown, pretty exciting that we're getting two good views upon reentry into Earth's atmosphere.
So again, a lot of things are happening pretty rapidly here. In about 3 minutes, the first set of parachutes will deploy. They are drogue chutes. They are conical in nature, and their job is to stabilize and begin sort of the initial deceleration of the vehicle, followed very shortly after by the main parachutes. There are 4 of them.
Dragon, SpaceX, comcheck.
And SpaceX, this is Dragon, over 4 Gs, 42 kilometers.
SpaceX, we have you loud and clear. Expect automated chute deployment.
And Resilience copies. We are at 40 kilometers, 4.34 on the Gs.
That's Commander Mike Hopkins reporting the Gs that they experienced upon reentry. And as you heard, we are now out of that loss of signal portion, meaning the plasma has eroded away enough from the spacecraft.
I think my heart skipped a beat as soon as I heard the
too.
crew responding back. And you know, one thing I did note, as soon as Mike turned on his comms, there was a lot of background noise, and that is sort of you know, the after effects of Dragon's re-entry.
So this view again from the WB-57 aircraft.
Dragon, SpaceX, a GPS is converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
Resilience copies. Nominal altitude for drogue deploy.
Crew Dragon Resilience now 30 kilometers over Earth. It's quite a quick drop over that 100 that we saw just a few minutes ago. And now we'll be looking for drogue parachute deploy within the next minute or so at 11:52 p.m. Pacific time, 6:52 GMT. Those 2 drogue chutes should deploy at 18,000 feet in altitude. Crew Dragon will be moving approximately 350 miles per hour.
Dragon, SpaceX, recovery team reports visual.
Good news, we're at 20 kilometers, seats are rotating.
SpaceX copies on the seat rotation.
And the seats are rotating into the proper landing position. We saw them a little bit more reclined earlier, facing the top of the capsule, and now they are more forward-facing towards that side hatch.
We also got confirmation that the recovery teams can also now see Dragon coming back.
Brace for drogues.
Copy. Braced for drogues.
So we are waiting for confirmation that the drogue chutes have deployed. We are expecting them to deploy any minute now.
And it looks like those might be our drogue chutes.
Visual 2 chutes.
SpaceX from Resilience, we show good drogues.
SpaceX copies and concurs nominal descent rate on 2 drogues.
Continuing to hear good news after good news. 2 drogue chutes have deployed. Everything looks nominal, and we're slowing the Dragon vehicle down. We are expecting the 4 main chutes to deploy within the next minute.
And those 4 drogue chutes. Oh, you can see them being pulled out now.
Visual on 4 mains.
And Resilience copies, and we see a nominal descent rate.
SpaceX copies and concurs nominal descent rate.
And this view coming from the WB-57, very clear image of those 4 main parachutes, slowing the vehicle down to what will be about 16 miles per hour prior to splashdown just off the coast of Panama City, Florida. If it were daylight, we would have an image of those 4 beautiful parachutes being orange and white, and still getting these incredible views, even though we are in a nighttime splashdown.
So we are waiting for visuals of splashdown. The Dragon 1 program had great success with water landing, with 20 successful splashdowns over the course of that program, 9 of which were carried out by flight-proven Dragon spacecrafts.
In space height, you've broken, but we show you just under 800 meters. Still good descent rate.
Just under 800 meters from the Earth. That's about half of a mile. And we are tracking splashdown.
And 600 meters, and we're showing 10 meters per second on the descent rate, a little higher than nominal.
SpaceX copies.
And what a view we have here. Even though it's nighttime, we have some great visuals of Dragon there with its 4 main chutes deployed, slowly coming back to Earth. Splashdown is scheduled for just a few minutes from now.
400 meters.
Now just a quarter a mile away from splashdown. And that splashdown time is scheduled for 11:57 p.m. Pacific time.
And SpaceX, we show nominal descent rates, 200 meters, brace for splashdown.
SpaceX copies. Brace for splashdown.
Seconds away from splashdown, everything nominal aboard Crew Dragon Resilience returning to Earth.
And there are the boats starting to chase after Dragon. begin their recovery operations as soon as Dragon lands. And I don't know if you can hear the applause
on Splashdown.
But we have visual confirmation of the Crew-1 Resilience capsule.
From Resilience. This is excellent news. We are splashed down. The pyros have fired. We're water.
SpaceX copies and concurs. We do see mains cut as well.
So again, you heard the applause. The Crew-1 capsule has returned, and we have successful splashdown. The main chutes have also cut as well. The fast boats are now making their way towards the capsule to begin the recovery operations. Again, that first boat is going to start to inspect the capsule and make sure that there isn't any residual toxic fumes in the air.
Dragon, on behalf of NASA and the SpaceX teams, we welcome you back to planet Earth, and thanks for flying SpaceX. For those of you enrolled in our frequent flyer program, you have earned 68 million miles on this voyage.
And SpaceX Resilience, it is back on planet Earth, and we'll take those miles. Are they transferable?
And Dragon will have to refer you to our marketing department for that policy.
And we are in 1. That's 3.1 of 4.800.
And Resilience, please repeat last about 4.800.
Okay, we are at 3, and we show stable 1.
SpaceX copies stable 1. Good news.
So a bit of levity from the crew and the core about the transferable mileage.
And that splashdown coming at 11:56 p.m. Pacific time, 6:56 GMT. We're hearing reports that the capsule is in stable 1 position, meaning it is upright. As we heard, those 4 main parachutes were cut, and those 2 fast boats will soon approach the vehicle. They will be able to, as we mentioned, sniff for those hypergol fuels, as well as attach buoys to the parachutes and make sure they are recovered. The teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them around 20 minutes to make their way to Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Suichi inside Crew Dragon. And while the teams move in, we are